And that was a prompt. That was a prompt to the colleagues in the Secretariat to begin to record this session, which is the day 3 of session 1, where we're trying to unpack and understand how development frameworks are planned and implemented. So you are very welcome to this 3rd day. We plan to be here for at least 2.5 hours. Today is our last day, so we try to maximize the time as well. It's an engaging session, meaning that you can bring practical questions from your space of work along the topics that we are discussing today. You could also bring practical challenges. Maybe you're a student joining us and you're just trying to dive into monitoring and evaluation, or you are studying something totally different and we're still curious to understand developmental frameworks. We're on day 3, so we may not go through the basics as we did in the first days, but we will be touching on other elements today where we try to look at monitoring and evaluation framework and developing and trying to see how that side really moves. We will respect those who have shown up on time, so I think we are actually good to start. We have 24 people in the room. That's good. If you could just write in the chat for the 23 people who are here with me where you're joining us from, that would really be great. We would also be interested to hear about your sectors. So which is your sector of work, or your sector of interest? So maybe you're studying and you haven't really settled in or worked in the sectors. Those who are in there, some working in education, in health. We've got colleagues who are also working in the environment sector, environment and climate change. We may have people joining us also who are working in other sectors that we haven't heard of. Water and sanitation was one that featured a lot on the very first day. The reason why we ask is because we are really speaking from these sector perspectives, and it would be nice for us to draw from your sector as we are going along. And in a way, we're trying to get a sense for the upskilling, the kind of interest that we have from people working in various sectors. We're also interested maybe today to know whether, what your interaction has been with monitoring and evaluation. What has your interaction been with monitoring and evaluation? It could be that you're working within a ministry and your program staff, or you are working around program development, or indeed that you're working with monitoring and evaluation and you've become conversant, or you are rather conversant with a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. Or you are completely new and you've been asked in your workspace or for an assignment to look at monitoring and evaluation. We would like to get a sense, just write for us in the chat what your interaction with M&E is. And you just, program officer supporting M&E colleagues, consultant working on M&E, researcher M&E, tutor M&E. We may have people who are also teaching, or M&E department. If we could populate the chat, that will really be helpful. I know you are listening in and you could be at your place of work, but the chat is actually a very useful space. And all these questions are important to make sure that we're providing to you information that's relevant to the space of work and also to the level of your understanding on monitoring and evaluation. Yesterday, we ended on looking at the national monitoring and evaluation policy in Zambia. And there was a little bit of homework that was given to me, but I hope that you also took it upon yourselves to have a look. Just as a wave of hands, anyone who managed to read, has read some sections of the national M&E policy in Zambia? Anyone who is conversant with it? Maybe you've just read the cover, or you heard about it in a ZaMEA meeting, you participated maybe in a forum where you heard people talking about M&E. Anybody who doesn't know anything about the M&E policy? Okay, silence. It feels like I'm on radio, speaking to myself. Anyone wants to share? Melody Simata, do you want to share with us your interaction with monitoring and evaluation in your workplace, in your school, in your studies. Pamela Nyirenda, Kabu Muhao, Naomi Sakala. We'll call upon names so that at least people say that they feel personalized. John Parker, Joa Parker. Do you want to share with us your interaction with monitoring and evaluation? Stephen Galasso. Stephen Galasso. Okay, Adjoa is in a noisy place. So please, yes, please write in the chat if you're in a noisy place. Violet Siwale, do you want to share with us maybe your work sector? Which sector are you working in? It would be good for us to just get a sense in terms of the sectors where people are working. Kumoyo Sitali. Okay, let's try on the M. Mwiza Hamwene. Yotam Nkata. I'm just going through my list here until I get somebody who responds. Patience Musonda, okay. Now, Mercy Sampa, are you able to share with us which sector do you work, Mercy? Are you working in health, education, agriculture? You don't have to tell us your workplace if you're not very comfortable, just to let us know the sector where you're working. That is really helpful for us. And the second question is your interaction with monitoring and evaluation. So I'll ask everyone who's in the room to just put those responses and we give it a minute before we start. Just to make sure we have an understanding of who we have in the room and the extent to which you have an understanding or an interaction with M&E. So those are the two questions. The first question is your sector of work or your sector of interest if you're studying as a student. If you work across different sectors, education, health, or if you want to say social sectors or combine it together, let's just get some answers in the chat. All right, we've got some answers. Let's keep them going. Thanks, Adjoa. Melody, you research and support colleagues in M&E and you work in the health sector. Great. Thank you, Moffat, as well. Adjoa, part of a project co-funded by the German government in the water sector. There is a lot of M&E and we have a dedicated officer. All of us as the technical staff need to support the reporting and even populate some of the portals and templates and contribute to the drafting. Fantastic. Franco tells us he's a program officer supporting M&E related activities and he's in the disability sector. Great. Let's get more coming through. Thanks, Edson, strategic information assistant in the health sector. Let's get the fantastic Scrivener, water and sanitation sector. No interaction with M&E policy before. That's good. That's fine. We will share some resources. M&E project lead officer who's working in health sector, very specific on HIV/AIDS. Thank you, Prince. More and more would be good for us to populate and to know who we have in the room. And another reason why we do this is, it's upskilling. And after we shut down our Zooms, it's always very nice to see that, for instance, Prince and Edson, if they didn't know of each other, as well as Mercy, who says she's a student in M&E, who's an intern at a health institution. Those kind of connections can also be made here within the chat. So the reason why we ask to get a little bit more information of of the sector that you work in and your interaction is to be able to make those kind of connections as well. We've got more responses coming. Kumoyo, who works in planning and budgeting in the Ministry of Health. Health is dominant today. final year student demography with statistics. Yes, tools, statistical tools is something that we're going to touch on today as well. And so on and so forth. The responses are coming through. For those who were not here on the first day, I introduced myself. I work on or along the whole cycle of project management, of the project cycle rather, and I've also been working in the last many years with monitoring and evaluation using various tools. My sector of work is predominantly public finance management and diaspora engagement. So those are the two kind of key sectors that I work in. But a lot of interaction with education, the social sectors rather, because of the nature of service delivery attached to public finance management, and also when we talk about the kind of support diaspora wants to give in the homelands. So really great to be here today, and very nice to see that the room is filling up. We've just asked that you give us your sector in the chat, and you let us know your interaction with the M&E space for us to get to know a little bit more about the level of information that, the depth of information that we will go into today. It's an interactive session, so the idea is for us to be able to explore different spaces where information is found, and thankfully we're using the virtual space. So, for instance, if we talk about the national development plan, the 8th National Development Plan, we will open the screen to look at the 8th National Development Plan and look into some of these areas that people are sharing. We've talked about the Sustainable Development Goals as a pertinent development framework that guides development goals and priorities for countries across the world. We also opened up to what that space looks like, and we looked at the indicators framework yesterday. We've also talked about regional mechanisms and the importance of attachments to strategic development frameworks at the continental level. And we're glad that colleagues were also able to share from their sector experience. So the reason why we also ask about the sector is also to get a sense of how, as others will be sharing, they would know how conversant other participants may be on the topic that they are sharing on. And that encourages people to be able to share also some resources. You can always feel free to share resources in the chat, and so on and so forth. So with that, nice, John, Chisha, environment sector. I'm yet to critically look at what is contained and curious to know. Kanchele, working in the transport sector, road and safety, heading the planning research department at M&E is one of the key areas. Someone else again in health sector, Muiza, thank you, and working specifically on HIV/AIDS programs. And then climate, again, environment and climate comes and features. Naomi, thank you for sharing, and we hope that you'll be able to that you feel comfortable being with us here in the room despite not having interaction with M&E. So the idea is that you're not expected to have any interaction with M&E for these sessions, but the idea is for us to get a sense of what is your interaction with the space. And so after having looked at development frameworks at global level, at regional level, sub-regional level, at national level, and we spent a lot of time yesterday going into the national development, the national M&E policy for Zambia, and also talked quite a bit around some of the challenges that are seen in its implementation, in the financing, the capacity-related issues, but also in terms of the follow-up and having, if you like, a very robust plan of action that cuts across provinces and districts and all the way to the central level as well, to ensure that implementation is, that the implementation is actually, that there is efficiency and there is effectiveness in how the program is being delivered. But at the same time, we also heard and talked a lot about the role that ZaMEA has in spearheading some of this knowledge generation, but also the role that ZaMEA can play as a knowledge broker, and as a center to build capacity. on M&E implementation, really bringing this professional sense to the important work. We also looked at, what it looks like when an institution takes on monitoring and evaluation to the highest level. And the highest level means kind of taking best practice from international standards. We looked very specific at the international and at the independent evaluation unit of the African Development Bank, and we explored and looked at what some of the key work that they do. So they really are looking at evaluation across the support that the African Development Bank itself gives, but also looking at sector support that's provided. And it's also able to produce cross-section of reports from comparative reports across countries, but also country-focused reports. We also saw how it was trying to elevate or trying to generate a community of evaluators by bringing different bringing the evaluation community once a year. Last year it was held in September, where they have an evaluation week, and that goes all the way from talking about how young and emerging experts are critical for the monitoring and evaluation space, to the kind of tools that are there and available for the for M&E experts on the continent to utilize. Another organization that we didn't quite talk about yesterday was the African, from an African perspective, we do have an African Evaluation Association. So essentially it's all it's an umbrella organization, and it's an umbrella organization of all voluntary VOPIs, as they would call them. So evaluation associations, if you like, all the evaluation associations. So the idea is that it has this umbrella-ship, and the idea is also to kind of generate what African evaluation should look like. There are various initiatives there, including the Made in Africa evaluation, and what they try to do at AFREA, which is the African Evaluation Association, or Association Africaine d'Évaluation in French. They have all information in both languages, which is actually very important for the evaluation community on the continent. Is that they're really trying to see how do they become the space for sharing information, but also the space in which capacity that is required in evaluation is built in from at that continental level. And while I think its registration is sitting in Ghana, it has the board and the executive board has got leadership from across the continent, and there's a lot of cooperation partners from international organizations to foundations, as well as bilateral partners who continue to support AFREA in its various works. It's relatively new. AFREA is probably only about 22 years old. Also, I think it was founded in if not in 1999, it's probably about 2000, but it's pretty young. And so, as one could expect, it's that the idea had really been how, do you have this force on the continent that tries to draw not just the national evaluation frameworks and the national evaluation associations such as ZaMEA in Africa, and how do you kind of have a nurturing around it? And the number of associations across the continent has actually grown. And what is also very important in that is you've got a lot of different platforms that provide information around evaluation. And so it was very important, as AFREA was kind of trying to set a footprint on the continent, that while we may borrow a lot from other evaluation guidelines, so for instance, the Europeans have their own guidelines, the Australia has its own guidelines, America has its own guidelines, led by these kind of associations at that continental level. AFREA was also, it put in a lot of energy just, I think, a couple of years into its birth to really think about how do we have African evaluation guidelines. So on that juncture, I will ask, anyone has ever heard about AFREA, the Africa Evaluation Association? Some people say AFRIE, AFREA, the African Evaluation Association. Have you attended a course, a webinar, heard somebody speak, saw them anywhere, never heard of them, or even had interaction? Maybe you've been invited to participate in some of their events as well, or signed up to an event because there are quite a number of events that also float. They also have meetings that actually are taking place every year. I think that the next one, if I'm not mistaken, is foreseen for next year in Rwanda, where it tries to bring different members together. Anybody with interaction with a FREA, or anybody who is a member of a FREA. Okay. So if you were a member of a FREA and you were not a member of ZaMEA, we will ask you some questions, but I'm being recorded. So AFREA has sort of different memberships at different levels. You can get an individual membership. This, associations can be signed up to, and you've also got sort of, I think, corporate members who are part of it. The reason that I ask is because for a long time, AFREA has also been trying to really engage with, and I think we actually have had interaction as ZaMEA with AFREA, and I would have asked Chair to come on and share a bit later on when he takes the floor. And the reason is that, we're trying to show that the work is complementary. What is sort of happening at the national level complements what is happening at the continental level in terms of M&E capacity and space and networking and sharing of knowledge and so on, and that these things are mirrored. So they are not in competition, as somebody would ask. They are, it's belonging to two of the institutions just adds value, and I think that it's actually very important that as more and more members of ZaMEA become also members of AFREA, we're also building we're waving the flag high for Zambia. Of course, membership is not as attainable as membership fees are not as attainable as it is in ZaMEA, and so I think a lot of times we're also encouraging people to start from home. And having said that, I think still a lot of activities and a lot of the outputs of AFREA still remain property that belongs to everyone. So, for instance, the African Evaluation Guidelines and the work that's there is really still useful for many. Now, somebody would ask, what are these? What is sitting really in these guidelines? I think the idea was, can we look at when we look at the international program evaluation standards, right? So at the highest level, you've got these program standards, and these standards are the ones that set whether we're seeing OECD criteria, American Evaluation Association guidelines, the Australian ones. I think the UK also has its own, and so on and so forth. All these evaluation guidelines as they are coming out. How do you have one that is much more representative from the Africa front? And the process had really been to go into these evaluation associations, voluntary organizations and evaluation associations, and gather their endorsement on it. So you've got like a checklist. I think there are about maybe less, I don't know, 30 or 40, maybe 30 items which they have listed there. And the idea is that it should just be able to be a tool that really helps evaluators, and it's a quality assurance, and it's a quality assurance tool. That's what it essentially is about. There's a website. You can view the website for you to have better information and for you to also get exposure to Francophone Africa, for instance. For those of us who are working in Francophone Africa, some very interesting work is shared through this platform. But even not, to kind of just engage and interact with other people. And there's much more we can share, but in terms of capacity, I thought that it was really important for us to kind of talk about AFREA and some of the important work that they do. But then there are many other platforms. Eval Youth is one of them as well. Eval Youth is a platform in which you can get a lot of understanding around M&E capacity, because today we're talking about M&E capacity, and that's why I'm talking about all these. But more importantly, we have ZaMEA. coming back home here, and I hope Secretariat, if it's possible, you just show the program that we're going to have for the next couple of days. And the reason why, we are sharing all this information is because we would like to have people participate in the upskilling program. They're essentially made for you working within Zambia, outside of Zambia, to have essential to have as essential parts of your toolkits as people that interact with M&E, or those who are working very directly with M&E. Some of the courses are paid and some of the courses are free, but that kind of interaction also just allows us to open up our minds, to open up our workspaces a bit into some of the possibilities, but also to open up our knowledge boundaries to what is fetching in the M&E space. So all these kind of spaces where information is shared around M&E are essentially important. There are also groups that others can sign up to, but once you become a member of ZaMEA, we add you to the WhatsApp group, and you are able to interact and even ask questions in our WhatsApp group and engage with some of the questions that are asked there from time to time. So I thought that was an important point to make in terms of building capacity on monitoring and evaluation for those who are outside of let's say, maybe within ministries, it's very distinct. The places you can go, you can sign up to courses, obviously paid courses at the University of Zambia also offers courses, and in various institutions. But to what extent do we sort of see these spaces where we're talking about building M&E capacity from a Pan-African point of view? And I think these are important for us to look at as well. Okay. Yesterday, I was given a piece of homework, and I thought that it's important that I come back, that I have done this homework. I'm going to share screen in a moment. Just give me a minute. And we are going to directly dive into. So the question was asked yesterday on, how do you make this? How do you do this? Okay, like this. Don't know if you can see that. Too much text. I was asked to look at a national development plan of another country, and I decided to do some reading. Some come easier than others, so I also gave myself a bit of homework. So I thought, to look at the third national development plan of Uganda, and we talked about it quite extensively and used it as a reference point yesterday when we were talking about national development plans and also on M&E. So the overall goal, quite similar to what we have in our 8th national development plan, whereas Uganda is in the 3rd one. They have a series that's counts a bit different from ours, and that looks at increased household incomes and improved quality of life of Ugandans. And then they've coined it around sustainable industrialization for inclusive growth, employment, and wealth creation from a sustainable point of view. And they have 5 growth drivers from agriculture, infrastructure, human development capital, tourism, minerals, oil and gas. And obviously all these have been identified in their 2040 vision. Now, what I also thought was very interesting, which you see a bit down there in the space, is that among some of the other things that they try to tag, they really talk about this kind of results-driven development plan. And that's what they really wanted to anchor it to. In fact, it has a specific results framework, which you can look at. The National Development Plan for Uganda is about 300 plus pages. We walked through some of those sections yesterday because we thought it was really interesting for us to be able, not to be scared to read big documents. As somebody once told me, that you are challenged by the number. But it also has service delivery at the grassroots, which is very important. So which means that there is a lot of emphasis also on local government and the role that they have to play, but also talking about how do you really have sectors and services sort of working together, and really trying to make this disconnect that's often there less and less. And then attached to their national development plan is a human resource development plan, which runs concurrently, because this is one of the things that came out as a critical lesson from its previous development plan, that usually resources are being detached. The specific question I was asked yesterday is that when we think about that development plan for Uganda, what about the midterm review? Both the National Development Plan and the midterm review, the leadership is under a National Planning Authority, so something similar to our Ministry of National Planning. And the emphasis and the key, I mean, I've taken all this from the terms of reference that were developed, or the scope of work that was developed for the midterm review of the National Development Plan for Uganda. And they really wanted to go back and unpack the development assumptions that they had made. They wanted to understand more about progress, because it had been 2.5 years. So midway is when they had really made to have an understanding of what is, what have we really done in terms of some of the targets that were made. They re-looked at the macroeconomic framework and, tried to check again, apart from just the assumptions that had been made, but the forecasts that had been made, were they on point, and what is important to revisit. They looked again at the financing arrangements, because we also noted yesterday that it's one of those plans that also details out some overall cost plan that gives an idea to implementers and supporters of what the cost implications of the National Development Plan are over the span of 5 years. But then it also quite length of details, and then also some of the results framework, but the M&E framework also gives you who is charged with the different tasks in terms of also the implementation as well. They're also interested for the midterm review to find out what are the lessons, where should they really put pressure in terms of reforms, and this is both on the structural and institutional reforms. And why is this critical? Because, in a lot of ways, sometimes we are thinking about, national development plans envision this kind of change, right? It's a very bold statement to say you want increased household incomes, and you want to increase livelihoods for the population, same objectives that we have in Zambia. And yet you haven't put in place the mechanisms in which the how will happen. So you could have a very robust financing plan, very robust, a very well thought of implementation plan, and even program from a program approach point of perspective. But actually you meet stumbling blocks where there are critical reforms that have to take place before you can see before you can be able to take some of the actions that have been planned in the National Development Plan, and to see some of the programs come to life. So those remain very important. And on another way, it speaks to other parts of it, productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness as well. Another objective of the midterm review was to really go in and check what are those challenges and what are some of the issues that came up that were not foreseen. And as you can imagine, I mean, this National Development Plan was being worked out just around COVID hitting peak. And even though we thought we had a very good understanding of what it would be like, those are some of the emerging issues. But in parts of East Africa as well, we have also seen, for instance, them being hard hit by environmental and natural disasters, or climate change implications and effects that kind of have to force governments to shift focus and to shift gear to deal with the emerging issues. Then it could also be political emerging issues that could come up, and Uganda is particularly can sometimes find itself in a difficult space, or parts of the country where you have conflicts that arrive not because of politics, but maybe largely because of land-related issues, so land conflicts with neighboring countries, and that could spur social could affect social could impact on the society, on social aspects. But then also the midterm review was very clear in that, this time that was remaining, the 2.5 years that were remaining, what can they really do, and what can they just push forward for the next development plan? So that was the plan for the review. And then I thought what was really interesting for Uganda is also the process. And these are all, by the way, snapshots. Like I said, this is the idea is that it's very practical. I'm drawing these things from huge documents. So the important thing is what people are interested in, they can find in different spaces, and the links will be shared. You will see the links in the PPT itself. The process was quite interesting. They had these sort of high level consultations, and the high level consultations were very critical for the midterm review. And the reason why I share the process is because that sometimes we're often seeing the midterm review just being external. But parts of it can be external, but essentially you need leadership that comes from within government, because they have to be cultured to want to embrace the results that will feed into the next season of planning. So you can see for Uganda, you've got the high level consultations that were chaired at the highest level with the Minister of State and Planning. And of course, again, as sitting with the organization of it, sitting with the planning authority. And they had quite a number of sort of high level consultations that they held with different partners. And the idea was to really get from a broad range of stakeholders what they saw, what were their perspectives in the implementation of the National Development Plan. And then obviously, yeah, the results of this were presented. If you go on the website for the National Planning Authority of Uganda, you will see a lot of different information around reports. And what I found really interesting, so that's the middle slide there that I have on the deliverables. I don't know why it goes to the bottom. But the point is that they broke this down into different types of reports to really match what the National Development Plan is like. And for me, then it speaks a lot to what lessons can we learn in terms of drawing different, in terms of a report, an evaluation report, because this is an evaluation report that provides information that is relevant and that can be digested for programming and design. So if colleagues, we've just seen that there's some people, for instance, working in the planning department. Maybe what would be more relevant for you is to look at those policy and strategic direction. Whereas other colleagues who are working around partnerships may be more interested in looking at development partnerships thematic report. And then others are, and I guess everybody's much more also interested in that results framework and what it looks like. But also you had an LED report, a local economic development report, among others, and annexes that just provided that extra piece of information. And what I also found very interesting is that you've got the summary reports, because sometimes, you want to have a snapshot, and then they have a brief report, which is actually quite nice, visually interactive. And from the briefing report, from the brief report, I actually took a snapshot of this, which is the thematic focus, which I found quite interesting. So visuals that have been used in the report. So this particular one was looking at manufacturing. It tries to really talk about, where were they in terms of what was achieved, what was not achieved, but also to give some very specific information and data in relation to some of the targets that have been made. So in manufacturing, for instance, they were trying to look at the number of registered cooperatives with special groups of women and youth, and you've got a number there, so it's already, you can engage with some of this data, but it goes on and on to talk about training aspects. It's really interesting because also you've got very visually, you can see what some of the challenges that they had met for this particular thematic focus, what they saw as some of the emerging issues, including issues related to disbursement of funds and so on and so forth, which if you read the report kind of cuts across all of them. So you're able to also pick out the public finance, the financing related issues. You're able to pick up the capacity related issues. You're also able to pick up the substantive issues that are for each space, but also that you have a space for recommendations in terms of recommendations very specific to the thematic focus. I think that, and I would like to hear from others, because now I've been talking for how long? Maybe 1 hour. I would like to hear from others who've, maybe you didn't, I didn't read all the reports that are sitting here. I'm actually, I opened the LED report and the results framework report, hoping I could share a bit more from there, but I didn't have time. But I think that these are kind of critical lessons for us to learn from another country, not very far from us, with a setting not very far from us, of how we can, first of all, be very instrumental or be very deliberate about planning for the midterm review in relation to Zambia's 8th National Development Plan and the subsequent ones to come, but also in how we present information and data, and the kind of leadership and processes that we should really be looking at, and the need to plan for all these things. I mean, just the consultations alone, even though it shows here that, you had like 2-week gap of consultations, I can imagine that all these different, all these different stakeholders that are involved and being led by the National Planning Authority in Uganda, the people were dedicated to doing this work. As somebody would say, as soon as a program starts to be implemented, the people who are working in M&E should already start planning for the evaluation and really using these M&E systems, these monitoring systems where we are capturing all manner of different data. And we learned the difference yesterday between monitoring and evaluation, and the fact that, we need monitoring and information systems that help us to draw data. Those systems are busy generating data that will be useful for an evaluation, so that they have also a raison d'etre. They have a reason. They have a purpose, right? And people can kind of see what is important. We're collecting all this monitoring data for us to inform our midterm review. Now, if a midterm review is not planned and it's not even seen in sight, it's a bit like it's like a bit like a small child when it's time for a bath. If they cannot hear the water, sometimes just hearing the fact that there's water, or you're being warned to say, in 5 minutes you should go and take a shower, you begin to mentally prepare to the fact that you're going to take a shower. And those of us sometimes whose grandmothers wanted to wake us up, if you're going to take a cold shower, you really become in a position of mental preparation. So mental evaluation, the planning is also a way of awakening, awakening colleagues who are working around program, colleagues who are working around planning and budgeting, to think a bit about the importance of results of things that are happening. And in a lot of ways, what that has also done is that if you see that the targets and if you see that the timing of certain activities and the promise that has been made to deliver on certain outputs, and the promise that has been made for you to achieve particular targets and the indicators therefore, that kind of prompts and pushes implementation and shapes it into a particular way. So I think that we can already learn in terms of how we position ourselves and we culture colleagues within, whether it's within a ministry, an international organization, an NGO, a faith-based organization, an organization that's very specific, working on health, HIV/AIDS, TB, to a ministry that's charged with a wide range of programs around in public health. There is the importance of just culturing monitoring as a part of us. We ended yesterday by trying to find out what monitoring is in our mother tongue. So if you were not here yesterday and you are from Northwestern Province, or I think we heard from Southern Province, we heard from Eastern Province, we heard from Northern Province, but Northwestern and my friends in Lambaland, we didn't hear from you. And those who are from Lusaka, we also didn't hear from you of what is your mother tongue word for monitoring? What is your mother tongue word for evaluation? Because we need these things cultured into us. So this was my share on another country's process that takes a development framework or takes a development plan and moves systematically. I mean, of course, you can read up, there are a lot of critiques also of this process. So it's not cast in stone and set in stone, but essentially we can still be able to learn from some of the things that Uganda has taken on in terms of reviewing its national development plan, and apply some of these, contextualize them for Zambia and see what that means. Anyone would like to add something on this before we move on? Anyone? Any questions? Monitoring Muchibemba. Ukuchecheta. Thank you, John. Any questions before we move on? Okay. We will move on in the interest of time. And so today, another part of the session, I mean, in wrapping up our session, where we're really trying to understand and plan development frameworks. As another key component of it, apart from looking at monitoring and evaluation, understanding the M&E policy, and we've just kind of looked a bit deeper into how a national development plan, the review part of it. Would also be interesting if anybody has been involved in a final evaluation of a national development plan. Anyone been involved in the final evaluation of a national development plan and you would like to share with us your experience? Maybe you were asked as a consultant, maybe it came through in your department and you had to develop terms of reference for final evaluation of a program. It could also be a program, so we can bring it down to a program, a sector program. Maybe the primary education sector program comes to an end and you've been asked in the ministry to be part of those who will put together terms of reference for this evaluation. Or we can just talk about our own experience with evaluation. Anybody wants to share your experience with evaluation? Anybody undertaking an evaluation right now where you are maybe part of a team, or you are the one drawing the terms of reference, or you've been called on as a consultant, or you're supporting an M&E team that is undergoing an evaluation and you're going to be a key informant, or basically somebody should be able to share something. I will give it 2 minutes before we continue. Anybody? Kumoyo, please share.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I think mine is on one activity which we're doing this week at work, which is vaccination campaign for human papilloma virus. Yes. For our target is actually girls between 9 and 14 years, mostly those who are in schools and those, of course, in communities. So we're giving them the vaccine, yes, to actually prevent HPV. So on a daily basis, we look at the coverage in terms of how we are performing in relation to the overall target of the girls, the number of girls in the district. So on a daily basis, there's always that update in terms of the number of girls whom we are vaccinating per day, and in each and every facility, we're supposed to have those reports and how they're faring. Yes, I think that's what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really taking us into what the objective is, but also sharing with us some of the key steps that you are taking as part of that evaluation. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? I see somebody else is unmuted, but maybe we cannot just hear you. Anyone else wants to share work that you have done not too long ago, last year, the year before, this year, with regard to an evaluation? Hello? Anybody wants to share what you're currently working on in relation to evaluation? Could also be that you just made comments to the terms of reference for an evaluation that's coming up. Or rather, what has steered your interest? So this one, I think everybody should be able to answer. What steered your interest to want to hear a little bit more about development frameworks in this particular case? What steered your interest to come and join us today? Okay. Let's check in the chat. Maybe somebody has replied. No, we are still on the... All right. Okay. So in any case, today's focus was for us to talk a little bit about the M&E an M&E framework, which we've talked about policy. We've talked about sort of a national policy that looks a national development plan. We also had the opportunity yesterday to look at some of the M&E frameworks from a national perspective. We viewed the one for Rwanda yesterday. We had a peek at it, and saw how they have, outlined some of the indicators that they have at the outcome level, but also indicators that they have in relation to outputs, and then also to talk a little bit more about the targets. The importance of a baseline, we touched on that yesterday as well, and also the importance of sources of information. So we kind of looked at the standard monitoring and evaluation framework. So we know that in one way or another, when we have a project in front of us for many years, actually, it has been that for development projects, and for any project, even in the private sector, for whatever you outline as a program, there has to be a way to check and to be able to see where progress. And obviously, this is where the monitoring and evaluation framework sort of comes up. It's a framework that is really supposed to guide project planners, project implementers in trying to fix their eyes on the results, but also giving space to understand what the middle milestones are going to be like. And so the focus that we had today is, I thought that what would really be interesting for us to do today, but let's see in the level of interaction we have in the room, is to talk about the components that would be in sort of this M&E system, right? And so I think one of the very important things that we need to look at when we have to put it together, because obviously when program staff go ahead and say, right, so these are the things that we want to do, our key objective, and we're drawing from different inspiration, developmental frameworks from different spaces, is for us to be able to work on girl-child education in a particular locality. And that's what we want to do. We want to see, the improved quality of education for girl children. And then tied to that, they have some very specific objectives that may have to do with, for instance, ensuring that you have the right infrastructure in place, and also ensuring that you have the right materials that children would be able to access. And then below that, you would have, different types of inputs further below that go into realizing some of the activities that would have been planned out to get to these outcomes. Now, when you're presented as an M&E with kind of a project concept, project idea that has been developed. So we are presented with a logical framework. The idea is that from an M&E point of view, it's important that you develop an M&E framework from the very beginning, and obviously accompanied by some kind of a system, right? Where you really are trying to say, from all the different people who are involved in supporting this particular project, who is doing what in relation to monitoring and evaluation of the project. Now, defining the scope for monitoring and evaluation is critically important, right? And here, after defining sort of what the scope would be, and it would have been nice for us to hear from colleagues from a sector perspective, so we wanted to make this as practical as possible, is that you would go ahead then and talk a little bit more about what you're seeing from the outcome and objective point of view. So this is sort of that theory of change that we talked about yesterday as well. And why is this essentially important? Because you're really trying to see what are the implications of every part of this project, all the different steps and all the different layers of the project into building up to your overall objective. Is there really a relation between what you're putting in as effort to the next level in terms of those outputs? Do you really see those outputs giving you, having an impact on what you see as outcomes? And how, to what extent are your outcomes actually contributing to the objective level? And so you really go into kind of trying to mastermind and unpack this from a very critical point of view. And what you do in evaluation, some point when you've built up, so if you've got your M&E framework, and let's say you're involved in a final evaluation, that's the reason why I asked who could have been involved in a final evaluation, is that a lot of times for the final evaluation, as part of if you're participating in a final evaluation, you are asked to sort of relook the theory of change as well. Did it really make sense? Did this method that the people who had put this project together, was there actually these kind of relational basis, some of the conditions that they have made, that they have assumed, have they really been necessary, or were they the relevant conditions for them to achieve some of those objectives? And I think that at the same time, of course, theory of change now, it's about, either we're putting it as a description or you put it as a diagram. The basic idea is that you've got everything coming together, and at the end of the day, you are trying to achieve outcomes and to facilitate change. So you need to see the relationship and links between what you've put there as the strategies, what you've put there as the actions, and what you've put there as the conditions, what you've put there as the resources or the inputs. So that at the end of the day, the intervention that has been set out is really an intervention that is expected to lead to some kind of a transformation or some kind of a change. So an evaluation would usually start by questioning the theory of change, or asking us to reframe the theory of change as well, and asking us to sort of relook it and critique it. And that's why I think it's very important for us, even at the development of an M&E system, that we think about the theory of change and how relevant it is to the project scope. And then, of course, as part of the M&E system, or as part of the M&E framework itself as well, what is also important is that you've thought a lot about the tools, right? In a lot of ways, we are thinking about these things in an abstract way. So we are thinking about the different information that has to be collected. We're often not thinking about how are we going to, one, capture the information, two, store it, and three, use it for analysis. So these three components in terms of management of tools for monitoring and evaluation are very critical. Because if all of a sudden we've just thought that we will, when this data is made available to us, it will be easy for us to analyze. We may find ourselves having captured data or collected data in a format to ask certain questions that don't allow the level of analysis that was anticipated. And so it's very important looking forward that as you are planning how the data is being collected, you really do have a plan of the kind of analysis that would be there. Now, data collection, obviously, and we have quite a number of data collection and data analysis tools that we're actually going to be sharing as courses within this session for upskilling. I wanted to just go back into the room and check before we talk about data tools. If anybody had questions around the theory of change, if anybody had questions around why it's important to kind of look at the scope of the M&E, so just these two aspects before we go into the data collection part. Any questions? Okay. Now data collection. Okay, so maybe before we even talk about data collection tools, I think that in a lot of ways, when you have already your outcome and your objectives and you've tied the different indicators. So you know, we saw yesterday, for instance, from the SDG Global Indicators Framework, that there was some kind of exercise that went through even at that high level to actually seek out indicators that countries would be able to pick on even many years later, regardless, countries at different stages of development in different spaces are able to collect that particular data that is used then to monitor the SDGs. So if you were implementing a project at a national level that was attached to the SDGs, obviously you have a set of indicators that makes it easier for you to understand what the global goals are. And as a national objective, you could bring that and tag it to it. But then you've got sort of your own type of indicators at that national level. Now, from a program perspective, how useful are some of these indicators is that you can draw inspiration in terms of what is looked at. So for instance, if you're looking at quality of education, you would pick on, you would look at the SDG indicator framework, which gives you inspiration of what is the world actually calling progress in the area of quality education, and then bringing it down to that national level and looking at the National Development Plan. What are the priorities and objectives that they have set out? And then coming below then to your own program and trying to understand what you are trying to achieve in relation to the indicators, and then building an indicator that is very much related to the project. So in short, we can't take the global proportion, the SDG indicator, and bring it down to a small project. But we have to sort of customize, we can still customize it, right? In a particular locality. We can also customize it. We can also draw inspiration from it and say that if even at the highest level, this is what the world is pegging at, can we do a bit more around disaggregation? So we get inspiration from disaggregating maybe in comparison, but we can also disaggregate sometimes according to what the national priority would be, or according to, you know, ensuring a different type of equity that that is being sought for within a particular within a particular context. So, for instance, when we talk about girl-child education, while in some countries girl-child education is not so much of a big deal. In fact, these days people are talking about boy-child education also in being an issue. You could also be able to contextualize information and contextualize your indicators so that they are smart to what and to as close as what you're trying to measure in terms of a project objective or a development objective. So when we are developing indicators, we really need to be in this mindset to talk about or to think about indicators that are really attainable and as close to us as possible for that particular project. When we're looking at the specific objective of the project, when we're looking at the overall objective, it may be a little bit higher as a goal, but when we're looking at the specific objective, we can't draw too far. And so otherwise it would be very difficult for us to be able to not progress. And at the same time, I think what is also important in thinking about indicators is that we need to be creative, but we also need to be realistic in where data is collected. Sometimes some projects have picked on national data statistics that are not collected on a regular basis. And you say, yeah, but we're going to tie this, as long as we see that, we're going to tie our information to the national census. And yet we know that in Zambia, the national census is taking place every 5 to 7 years or however long it is. And so our project is within 3 years. And so basically we will be running a cycle in the project in which we don't have any data for us to put for us to peg our progress to. So we're drawing a little bit too far out in terms of data collection. Another criteria which is really important when we're thinking about indicators is that we, as much as possible, and particularly when we're talking about government-related projects, these should be indicators that have some kind of recognition around them, right? An ambition drawn from the National Development Plan, drawn from a sector strategy development plan, drawn from a continental plan, drawn from somewhere where government has given its stamp, because that also helps us to give a bit of legitimacy to what the project, to what the project is trying to attain, and that you're working within government prioritization, if you like. So ease of, and then there's the data collection itself, which I think is really interesting. And I think in terms of data collection tools, within government, yesterday we heard that you've got a monitoring information system, a management information system that should be collecting monitoring data. But to what extent this has been used, it's less known. And so that there's also something to be said around indicators where data collection remains relatively weak. So, you've got a project that's going to run across the country, and yet that half of the country does not collect this kind of data. Let's say on, it could be a project that looks at health and nutrition of the youth at a particular point, and then you are trying to collect data, let's say, from youth centers. And and maybe it may be known that youth-centered services are not being really provided in a designated space. So which means that actually even the youth themselves are not bringing forth this data. I mean, there's nobody actually collecting this kind of information. And yet we've put an indicator that talks that will just not allow us to collect this data accurately, or we don't have the opportunity to collect the data. So I think that remains also very important. But of course, on the market and in terms of different tools, you've got a lot of different ways of collecting data, from depending on what type of project that you're running, from humanitarian projects to development projects to private sector. Excel is one of the spaces in which we're talking about quantitative data is collected, but also more and more we are seeing tools that are there for qualitative data. You've got SPSS, and there'll be some courses, by the way, on all these. These are sort of part of those toolboxes, that are used to collect data. Stata is one of them as well, and I'm name dropping them because a Google search allows you to see all these tools, and some of them are actually used both for data collection, but they're also being used for data analysis. And some of them you can use to sort of be able to connect. So you can use, for instance, Stata. You take your information from Excel, which you are able to extract and put into Stata, and that helps you to do some data analysis and helps those who need interpretation to go ahead with it. And the same would be with SPSS. And then you've got, you've also got other data analysis tools like Power BI. I know that we're going to have actually a course that is going to run on Power BI as a space for collecting, as a tool that is there for data analysis. Power BI is particularly interesting because Power BI also allows you to do some visualization. It also allows you to be able to create dashboards. It allows you to just be very creative around the use of data. COBOL 2, which was predominantly used in the humanitarian space, has become much more and more user-friendly in the space, and a lot of people running different courses on the COBOL 2 box. And it's quite a user-friendly tool. I find it quite user-friendly too, because you could also, some of these tools you could also use, for instance, when you're collecting data in the field for using mobile phones, or using kind of handheld tools, handheld devices rather, in terms of collecting information. But this is when we're talking about sort of, for instance, information for an evaluation, where you're really trying to collect data that is used then for analysis and later on for visualizations. These days we have so much talk about artificial intelligence, and about the use of how do you artificial intelligence and big data at some point has become a very interesting topic, and ChatGPT is also one of those spaces that people are talking more and more about. How is that going to transform the way in which we use, for instance, ChatGPT for understanding a bit more about service delivery. I don't know, AI and and all these things that are there, but basically trying to use artificial intelligence, and with that combination, the availability of large sets, large sets of data and big data as such, to have a better understanding of what is actually going on. And then, of course, there's also that way of looking at, I mean, the generic way of collecting data with census surveys, for instance, right? Or household surveys, or surveys in general, of how we collect data that can be used, and data also collected through focus group discussions, for instance. That's another space, and this is when we're talking about evaluation, and we're trying to get a better sense of qualitative data. So we've got different tools that we would use for quantitative data, but of course we're also in a world of we're in a world in which we're using different how are we calling it these days? We're calling it mixed methods. And so, you are rather intrigued by the way, the sector is kind of also using certain tools and being innovative. And I recall that particularly even during COVID, or even in places where there's conflict and people are still trying to get a sense of what is happening, that there are these sort of innovative tools using social media, or in spaces in which data has to be collected, but you want to remove bias from the evaluator, you use different types of data tools, where you kind of are able to leave the participants on their own with some kind of a diary, for instance, and for direct beneficiaries for Girl Child Education Project, that I recall that you left them with a mobile phone, or you left them with a diary, and then anonymously they submitted it and told you about their different experiences, without interference of questions of evaluators, and so on and so forth. So different tools that are used in terms of collecting monitoring data, and also in terms of collecting evaluation data. I'm just going to check the chat and see. Okay, we're still in wanting to know how monitoring evaluation applies at the national level. It was especially insightful when you applied it to SDGs and the education project. Sorry, Frances, I haven't understood how monitoring and evaluation applies at the national level. Frances, if you're on, if you can just speak and let us know what your question is, I'll be more than happy to answer it. So yeah, this is when we are, I think I was talking about mixed methods approaches, and I think mixed methods Now we're talking evaluation. Mixed method, I think, but in a way I tend to think about it also when you use it in research. But I think that some of these initiatives or some of these approaches have been used when we're trying to get a sense of how can we become better at understanding impact. Now, if we only used quantitative information, we leave a very big part of the story that's not very well. We leave a big part of the story from those who have interacted with the project and from those who were to draw benefits from the project. So in a way, in a lot of ways, I think that you've got evaluations that are really encouraging that we begin to use a wide range of tools and techniques that open up the space for various types of information that's coming from the project implementation, and to understand the impact that the project has had. And so you've got this combination of trying to bring in, to understand sort of quantitative, the quantitative information, so what we've put in the targets and the log frames, and in terms of the, but then to also go one step further and understand the narrative behind it. And you'd use different types of tools to do that. So for instance, within the space of a survey, you've got questions that are really asking more qualitative information, and there are some that are asking more quantitative information. And obviously the analysis would have to be very the analytical tools is where I think is where you've got to see the cut, because sometimes, of course, with quantitative information, like with graphs in Excel and things like this, it's easier to see how many women are being impacted, how many youth, how many acres of land were cultivated in this year, how many bags of natural fertilizer were used, if it was sort of a more project that was looking to be much more environmentally friendly. You can sort of count some of these things. But then there's more on the quality side, talking about, for instance, the consumer response to crops that came out of a project that was looking at a more less fertilizer and a more climate friendly approach. So this kind of information is probably taken much more from listening and hearing what those views would be. Whereas, so you've got different methods in there for the collection, and also different methods in terms of how you're going to analyze that information. But I mean, I wanted to talk about, when I'm talking about this sort of mixed methods evaluation strategy, and you've got a lot of resources, people that are writing about it now. I think what is important as one of the first steps, and I'm taking this from one of the writers, I've got to remember his name, I think he's called Bamberger or something like that, and you will see his reference in the documents, but he kind of gives a figure of how you should try to go about it from an evaluation standpoint, that you need to, first of all, to understand, of course he was using you need to understand what is the research approach, what is the most dominant approach that you're going to use, right? Is it going to be more quantitative dominant or more qualitative dominant? And then you do this before you bring in the research team, because of course the research team is informed by the approach you're going to use and the skills they may have in terms of that. And then the next thing that is important is then to talk about the research questions. And I found this pretty interesting, because sometimes when we think about the research approach, or when we think about the approach we're going to use for the evaluation, we're already thinking that we should be formulating the questions before the team even comes in. How many times do you receive a terms of reference that has already asked you all the relevant questions that need to be asked? And doesn't sometimes even allow, and sometimes they will tell you, so for the questionnaire, we're expecting you to put all these things, instead of really allowing the team that is going to be built to help to define the questions. We could have some maybe core questions or core specific directions that the evaluation would seek to go into, or specific themes, I would say. direction is a bit too suggestive. But then the building of these questions, evaluation questions, really have to come from the team that's sitting together, because they would have understood, first of all, the approach they would like to use, but also understood much more clearly the scope of work that they have. And then, of course, as with everything else, you build your hypothesis, and then you design that evaluation. You always have a sample. You talk about, the kind of sampling method you're going to use. You talk about the data collection methods that are going to also be used. And in this case, for the data collection methods, you sort of have these two competing methods, right? You have the quantitative one and the qualitative one, but always thinking about what was the dominant evaluation approach that is going to be used. And then obviously you blend this into what is known as a mixed method design. And then of course, after as part of this, you also have to look at how are you going to make sure that your data is robust. So we're talking about the quality of the data. So triangulation is essential. And also trying to make sure that you get data validation before you go into analysis, always with the different tools, quantitative, qualitative, and then you go into kind of into the next steps of using the tool that you would have, and disseminating the information that you would have present. So that, I think, is really critical. But maybe I look again in the chat. I was responding to a question you asked, why we wanted to be part. Okay, Francis, you are welcome. We're having an interlude. Stephen says monitoring Mulunda is Kumona. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for enlightening us on that. Another aspect when we're talking about, I mean, what we have been doing, or what I've been trying to explain, is how we're going about that monitoring and evaluation framework. We've talked about the data collection tools. I also thought that it would be interesting for us to talk more about the monitoring and evaluation roles. Now, I remember having had to talk to young and emerging evaluators on this, and this was like a half-day course on its own. And I remember we had our chair from ZaMEA, Victor, join us in really sharing his own experience and the different roles that he we had different people participating there and really sharing from an M&E perspective. Because when we talk about them, and when we've just put a list, you have the M&E officer, you've got the M&E, you've got people working in different roles on M&E, you've got people who are working around M&E coordination, M&E planning, and so on and so forth. And I found that sometimes we're confusing titles with roles. So what I wanted to do in this juncture, I noticed that we had a couple of people, when I asked the question, your relationship with M&E, we had people talk about, okay, Shatulo, if you are here with us, could you share with us, because you said you worked as monitoring and evaluation programs officer 2 years ago for an economic empowerment project, also on food security and primary education and health. Shatulo, do you want to just share with us that experience that you had in us trying to understand M&E roles? So we're at the point where we're trying to understand monitoring and evaluation roles. And I'm just wondering if you can share with us what your role was like, what you got to do in this role. Shatulo, would you like to share with us?
Good afternoon.
Hi, Shatulo, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So as an M&D programs officer, I was managing 4 program officers from the said projects that I've mentioned. And some of my duties were report writing, like after 7 days of the implementation, I would write an activity report. Then I would write monthly reports from the activity reports. And then we would conduct an internal midterm evaluation of how the projects are running. Then I would also develop data collection tools. I also developed the monitoring and evaluation plan for my former organization where I was working, Zambian Rainbow and Development Foundation. So those were some of the roles that I did.
Thank you, Shatulo. A question for you. What kind of data collection tools did you use?
Okay, thank you. There were both qualitative and quantitative data and collection tools, which I would analyze thereafter in producing the reports.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Shatulo. We'll come back to you. And thanks for sharing that experience. That goes from, talking about how you're involved in the design. So the M&E plan, you're responsible for the M&E plan, you're responsible for developing the tool. My guess is also you're responsible for teaching people how to use the data collection tools effectively. And so that when you can to produce your reports, you know that it's reports that you can rely on. Stephen, you are a monitoring and evaluation graduate. You enjoy studying and you can't wait to learn a lot from our wonderful profession here. I wanted to ask you, Stephen, which tools from your M&E studies that have you interacted with? Which data tools? Stephen, if you can share with us the data tools that you've interacted with, and maybe you've even used one as part of, when you may be writing some of the research papers, or you had to do some homework to do an assignment rather, or write a paper. Which of these data collection tools did you learn about in your course, Stephen? Stephen, super. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm sorry. I was busy doing something else. Yeah.
That's okay.
During my studies, I actually I'm actually familiar with SPSS. I was taught how to use SPSS and monkey survey. I'm also familiar with that one. Right now, I'm actually enrolled to a school that teaches Excel. I want to be more familiar with Excel as well. But during my studies, I was more familiar with SPSS. Thank you. And I want to comment on monitoring and evaluation. I'm actually from Northwestern, but I live in Saka. In Lunda, we call it monitoring is actually kumona. Kumona means you are looking at something. I think that's what I can interpret in Lunda monitoring. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Thank you so much. Stephen, that was a really, really nice to remind us of some of the other survey tools that are out there, right? And Monkey Survey, I remember even going back, that used to be our survival. And it's funny how I find that Monkey Survey sometimes has not really changed from the way it used to be a long time ago. And it still remains one of those very much used survey tools for developing questionnaire. I wanted to ask anyone in the room, the competitor that I find these days is the other one, the one that we're using on Google. So Monkey Survey, Monkey Survey versus the Google version. Anybody want to give the pros and cons there? Monkey survey versus Google form. What is your preference? Anybody wants to answer that? Hello? Survey Monkey versus Google form. What is your preference? So both of them, as I explained, I'm sure somebody's trying to unmute. Caroline, did you want to help us with the answer? Caroline Mulenga? Ah, no, I know who to pick on. Edson. Edson Mianza. Edson, you haven't activated your mic, but I'm sure we'll be able to hear you if you do so. Edson. Or Kelvin Mununga? Kelvin Mununga, what is your preference? Survey Monkey or Google form? Francis Daka. While somebody's going to give us that answer, Muiza Hamwene. Muiza, you're working in the health sector and you're an M&E assistant for an HIV, AIDS, and TB program. Do you want to tell us a bit more about your role? Muiza. Muiza Hamwene. How about Enson Mwale? Enson, you are an M&E officer at the Civil Society for Poverty Reduction. And you've worked on various poverty reduction projects. So it would really be interesting for us to hear when we are talking about monitoring and evaluation and some of the things we've talked about, even at that national level, what are you seeing and what is your interaction? Enson? Enson Mwale. Enson Mwale? We will give you a few minutes to unmute. Okay, Muiza can't talk, so she will type. Thank you, Muiza. We wait for your response. I saw that Kelvin Mununga. Kelvin, do you want to tell us why Google Form is preferred for you rather than SurveyMonkey? Go ahead, Kelvin.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon, you're welcome.
Thank you. Am I audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, please. I'm not very familiar with the other software, but I'm very much familiar with the Google Form. And
Okay.
this is it's quite user-friendly. Yes, I think that's the only reason that I can give as of now. I'm a student, by the way.
Okay, super. Kelvin, are you an M&E student or?
I'm studying development studies, and
Super.
I'm also working for FRA and corp marketing department.
Okay, super. You are welcome. So I've just sent you the link for SurveyMonkey, which is yeah, I mean you can do the same thing. You know, you actually it's expanded more to many other things in SurveyMonkey. You can go from, I think you can even do registration of events there. You know, and they're doing all sorts of things. But the idea is basically you could use it also as a tool to understand a little bit more yeah, you introduce different surveys. I was actually going to open a survey on SurveyMonkey that I was just using yesterday, but I think I've seen that it's told me that I can't enter it anymore. And basically it does the same. You get a link that's sent to you. And in terms of creation, you have to create, if you have to use the SurveyMonkey, you create an account, and from there you can generate your form. And like you, I find Google form to be maybe a little bit more user-friendly because I have a Gmail account. So if you have a Gmail account in your Gmail on your computer, you will find somewhere where it actually just shows you how you can, how you open a Google form. And I was just going to, because we are in the spirit of practical sharing, if I show that to you, so that's my Google page, which has a million things open, and you go to your Google Apps, and inside your Google Apps, you scroll somewhere, because somebody may be asking, what is this Google form? And under, you've got all sorts of form. We've got all sorts of information. You can have Google Finance, Google Docs, that's when you want to create a new document. Google Sheets is like Excel and Blogger and so on. And somewhere as you go down, you have something called forms. And when you open forms, it gives you access. It tells you which kind of form. As you can see, I create a lot of forms from working around my women's church group to to registration of people arriving for meetings. So I'm using the forms quite a lot. So what it does is basically it's also kept other forms you have received before. And I'm sure all of us have filled up a Google form one day or another. Yeah, so you've got, so let me see if this one will open, for instance, and it gives you the sense, where you can you fill out very basic information. Yeah. So you can use it for many different kind of things. So that's the Google form, just coming back to those who may want to know a little bit more about that. But please investigate, look into your Google if you have one. And then, yeah. Prince, you are welcome. You're a bit in and out of the meeting, that's okay. So when it comes to data collection tools, I use Google Form because it's user-friendly and it's free, that's correct. And it is Kobo, and Kobo too, especially for mapping of clients. Other tools are developed by our developers in the health sector. Thank you so much, Prince, on sharing that. I think tools, so in-house tools, as somebody would call them, tools that have been developed by the ministry, by your organization to collect monitoring information, but also to collect other information on project implementation is critically important. So thanks a lot for sharing on the tools. And did we have anyone else who wanted to share on tools? We've talked quite a bit around the tools. Kobo, if you want to learn a bit more about Kobo, I was actually going to check in our upskilling program. I don't think we have Kobo on that list, but if we've got a demand for it, please just indicate. Maybe I could actually ask that as a question. Are there tools that I will just reshare the upskilling schedule that has been shared by Secretariat for those who were not in the room. But yeah, you will see somebody has just liked it. So it will show you that the message up. And you'll see the upskilling schedule. And in the upskilling schedule, we also show some of the tools that we are actually going to have as dedicated courses. So I will encourage you to communicate with us, either even here in the WhatsApp chat, and say, this is the tool that you are using, or these are the tools you are conversant with, and it's difficult to find more information about it. And it's possible for ZaMEA for us to work around the needs of the community in terms of generating a course around it. But indeed, with some of these tools, I think what is important is that, the usability of it. And some tools obviously are more used in particular sectors than others, but a lot of these tools are actually used across different spaces. I wanted to talk a little bit more about data visualization as well, because I think that it's, you know, it's an important space as evaluators, you know, when we talk about data visualization, because often we talk a lot about analysis, right? And usually the tool that you use for data collection gives you a good sense of the different tools. Sometimes the same tool can be used for data analysis. So for instance, in Excel, you can be able to go all the way into making tables and graphs and so on and so forth. And I find very practical. I mean, the newer versions of Excel these days can also give you some really interesting looking graphs and also kind of, you know, when you click up to check your pivot tables and so on and so forth, you see a lot of interesting information. But I wanted to talk a little bit about like, you know, the value of these visualizations, because I think as those. Oh, Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam. I want to ask a question on data collection. Let's assume you are collecting data from a person who is a charcoal burner, and during the interviews, that person depends in charcoal burning. How can you know that the person you are interviewing is giving the genuine and not biased information? Thank you, Madam.
Good question. Anyone who's conducted interviews before, I'm sure lots of experience in the room. Does somebody want to take that one up? Let me see who. Raffo, are you in the room? Or Victor? I don't know if you heard the question. Someone else. Edson? Edson, did you want to take up the question? Edson Mianza.
I didn't get the question clearly. You can just repeat and maybe I can try to attempt.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
My question was, assuming you have been assigned to collect data or information on climate change, the effect of climate change, and during your interviews, you have met or you have met a person who's a charcoal burner. My question is, how can you know that the person you're interviewing is giving you the valid information, not biased the information, looking at the sensitivity of the interviews? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think with my experience in data collection and what I know is that we respect, people's responses about any subject you are conducting. So even if you know that this is the wrong answer, as long as the person is giving that's their feeling. That's why it's called a research, and you have different, responses from different people. And at the end of the day, when you know you are doing the analysis, you are able to say how many people mentioned things like that. And if you find that it's only maybe one person who mentioned those responses which are biased, they won't be maybe involved in the analysis, because your analysis maybe is depending on the quantitative part. If number of X people said this and only maybe 2 said this, which means it was a biased, and you go for for those who have said a lot in terms of the analysis when you're doing the analysis. That's how I understand, research in that way and data analysis. Yes.
Thank you, Edson, for that response. And I think in terms of triangulation, you're absolutely right that you've also got to have other sources of information to kind of confirm what has been shared. And I mean, your question, Stephen, is, I think I would also say it quite depends. If you were asking, I don't know, a farmer on the impact of climate change, what kind of clear examples would you be asking so that you are able to confirm it with either farmers in that particular area or growing that type of crop, or so I mean, I think triangulation of information is always very important. And I think the same would be if we were going to ask about the impact, for instance, of Constitutional Development Fund in a particular environment. What has been, you know, what is people's experience around the use of CDF? And it really depends on whether you're speaking to a member of parliament. Are you speaking to somebody who is a beneficiary? Are you also speaking to those who had unsuccessful applications, those who've had maybe a previous experience a bit different in another space? So I think that trying to get varied views is one that's important. But I think still at the end of the day, if you were looking for what would be a common perception, I think you wouldn't leave it to one key informant. Even in a focus group discussion, for instance, there's sort of certain criteria that we have to take care of when we are asking certain questions. From the way we set the questions, who is included in that focus group discussion? So for instance, a focus group discussion with the chairman of the cooperative, for us to understand how effective the board has been, may not give you the kind of answers that you're looking for from other members, and may make the chairperson speak much more above the other voices. So the conditions of a focus group discussion to give you effective responses, or to give you as accurate to the situation as possible, are important. But I think that's where you need also complementary tools as well. In the example that you have given, a focus group discussion, I think, is one way for you to get a common view around what the impact has been on climate change in a particular community, and then going to sort of community leaders, but then also looking at who is most affected, who could be most affected is also very important. So who are those vulnerable groups, and getting what their perception and viewpoints are. So you are really trying to get information from different sources before you get through to, before you can sieve through what is actually attaining, but still be able to report your observations from those different levels. And yeah, that would also be my compliment to what Edson has answered. Is that okay, Stephen?
Very much okay, madam.
All right. Okay. We will try to wrap up in a bit and just get a sense from you. I mean, I was very keen to talk a bit about data visualization, and I wanted to get a sense from from those in the room what you sort of foresee as data visualizing. I mean, where you've found a value for first of all, we should talk about tools. One of the tools that I mean, that there are many different tools that are out there, but one of those that just speaks off the top of my head is Tableau, which you can always do by the way, a lot of these tools you can also do like a trial version for free, but you usually have to pay for you to be able to experience the full version of it. Now, Tableau tries to really bring in, when you've got data and you have information, and then you really want to have a way to explain whether it's trends, patterns, and it's also become very popular with big data. It's become very popular with big data because it has a way of digesting all of it, so that you can essentially be able to make sense out of large data sets. And I think that at the end of the day, I don't know, I was saying to somebody that all of a sudden, some of these tools have existed for so many years, and then somebody talked about infographics, and now like they can be, you can basically write nothing and then put an infographic and people are impressed. So I also wanted to kind of come in and say that data visualization, while it's very good to help us understand the data much clearer and much better, what is important is actually the data itself. how good the data is, and what kind of quality state it's in. So good data helps us actually make people understand the reality better. But we can't sort of have not good data and then have very nice graphs. So graphs and visualization cannot compensate for the very, the genesis of it is the data. And so data collection remains really, really essential. And I think about, things like projects in many countries where we're talking about, for instance, school feeding programs or humanitarian assistance, or even programs that try to depict, natural disasters and how they've affected people. I mean, I think sometimes we're just drawn to see these, data visualization has become this thing. It's as though you have a live TV in front of you. You see this big graph that shows you the impact and the implication of something. And yet, I think we still need to start caring about the very basic, which is the data itself. How good is it and what's the quality of it? And that really makes the work that visualization does even better. And so I think that it's really important for us to think about that. But I think in terms of tools, you've got many tools. Tableau is also is one of them. And then you really do see how you can captivate an audience. I think there's another one called Python, which is also a data visualization tool, and all of it is really, just about how do we move numbers, figures, words into visuals, graphs, things that people will be able to relate to. Because as human beings, I think we're kind of much more, we're probably just much more visual, and we are impressed by patterns and pictures and things, and maybe less than paragraphs of sentences. So investigate and look about and see some of these tools that are there. Some of them you also have tutorials online, which just give you a very basic background to data visualization, and you can really try to understand patterns and trends and correlations using some of these tools. So I thought that was important for us to talk about. The very last slide that I had was for us to, before we go into questions, was to talk a bit about the report writing, but I think we're actually going to have a specific training session on that. The reason why report writing, I think we just heard how essential it is, and it draws, I like how Shatulo had said it, using the M&Es, designing the making an M&E plan, designing the data collection tools, and then using that to draw the reports. And report writing, in a lot of times we're putting it on we sometimes even forget to put on our CVs as a skill, because it really is a useful skill to have as an evaluator. And as somebody who's working around program development and program implementation, because it is in the reports that we communicate progress, that we communicate lessons, and we also give a sense of what we're planning for the next period. Now, reporting sometimes is sort of seen as, we just write the report, we send it to the donor, and then when it's done, it's a ticking box in the exercise, but it's actually supposed to be used for learning. We are to document our results in there. And so I was going to use the opportunity, but for the interest of time, and I think 2 hours is a good time to stop, in that there are many different templates for reports. I worked around the European Commission, and in the European Commission, you've got some standard templates depending, and this is at EU delegation in Zambia. And you've got templates that are given to project partners that they can fill out. So the interim report in a narrative form, in a financial form, the interim report, the final report in a narrative form and dash form, and they look quite close to each other. And I guess that's not very different practice from other development partners. I think, you know, places like USAID and other development bilateral partners, African Development Bank, the World Bank, and all these other spaces have something that asks you for some kind of a report that comes in for that really supports the monitoring. So it's a very critical tool for monitoring. And a template may be provided. In these days, actually, in most of the cases, there is an existing template. And what you see more and more accompanying these reports is that you're supposed to be able to provide quantitative information. That takes you back to that M&E plan that had been made, the monitoring and evaluation framework and the plan. To what extent are you implementing that? And what are those numbers? Where are you in terms of those numbers? In bringing this back. So a report will always have the qualitative information and the quantitative information. The report also talks a bit about capacity-related issues, financing issues. You know, if funds were delayed to be dispersed by the donors, or that, you know, from the headquarters when they were received of the NGO to reach the district, it took some time, or any constraints that were faced. All that is included in the report. But most importantly is also the pathway for the future, right? For the tasks that remain, what is the project going to focus on to get to those objectives? And it really always draws back again on that M&E framework. So we go back again to the importance of the M&E framework, because without that, you're not able to talk about what is left to be done in relation to what had initially been planned. So I think that as we are wrapping up, it would be interesting to hear when we're doing reports, because there's also a way of writing the report to write it. But how do we, you know, let's just hear a bit of different experiences on writing reports. And here we're talking about monitoring reports. So there would be progress reports. You can call them a progress report, an interim report. And particularly on the narrative, not so much on the financial. We're not looking at the financial reporting side of things right now, but my interest is to hear a little bit more about monitoring reports, but also to hear about evaluation reports that you may have encountered. Anyone busy writing a report these days in your department, for a consultancy? Rafael.
Thank you, Paddy. Sorry, I was on and off because of connectivity issues, so I missed a lot. But maybe just to share in terms of my experience on the evaluation, just came to learn that there are a lot of people out there who are masquerading as consultants, but there are a lot of gaps in terms of their work. No wonder we are supposed to be vigilant and prepared. You know, no wonder we have a lot to gain to be members of ZaMEA. Just at least to have minimum standards, you know, as far as these evaluations, M&E is concerned. So in terms of my experience, we had recruited this consultant, so-called consultant. He's actually calls himself a doc, you know, he's very powerful. Okay. So then he does this evaluation, then the work, in fact, if I say below standard, that's an understatement. You can imagine that in terms of the quality of work. So we had literally to redo it ourselves and so on and so forth. It was a situation whereby, for instance, the numbers, just puts the numbers there and though it was just something else. So in terms of point of emphasis, of course, there's need to be very clear when we're doing an evaluation. You know, we're supposed to be very clear on what the task is, for instance, especially where there's a baseline that was done, you know, and then we're doing a midterm and stuff. There's need for that clarity, you know, on what you are measuring from the baseline to where you are. But beyond that, for instance, you need also to speak to the numbers. It's not enough to generate the numbers, just lump them there. Speak to the numbers. What do they mean? You know, what's the implication and so on and so forth. So I find that to be a weakness or a gap in a number of reports. Thank you, Paddy. Bye.
Rafa, that's a very good observation. And I think something that we can actually all learn from. I like what you said about the numbers, and I will use the same in talking about charts and graphs. Like I was saying with data visualization, sometimes we're throwing in charts and graphs, and you're saying, so what does this chart have to do with the text that we're putting in? So the numbers have to be spoken for or well explained. And in actual fact, I think that particularly for evaluation reports, and you've got from the eval community, I was actually going to just quickly share this screen because that's exactly where it's coming from. The reason why I'm sharing all this is to show that it's not because I'm clever to know these things, they are found on the internet. So you'll be able to find them when you're looking for them. So eval community provides a lot of different resources, and yeah, you can have a look and see all the different things that they write about evaluation. But there are many other communities that are that do all these things, and Raf touched on them in terms of talking about the quality of the reports. But I mean, it also tries to give you a picture, because sometimes you get people saying, yeah, but so this evaluation report, particularly evaluation reports, usually at the beginning of the evaluation, you would have already agreed on what the evaluation report structure would look like. I work on public finance management assessments, and we have a prescribed set of, I mean, there's a standard set from a secretariat that's sitting somewhere that has prescribed the type of reports we have to write, so that the public expenditure financial accountability financial assessment report for Zambia, for Rwanda, for Zimbabwe, and so on will be comparable. So you've got almost quite similar templates. So that is in terms of an evaluation, a type of assessment or an evaluation that is done on public finance side. But I know that more and more, for instance, even some country strategies, right? So country strategy support papers. So for instance, the World Bank has its own type of report that they will have attached to the assessment on evaluating a particular country's support program. So the support that the World Bank gives to Zambia after a number of years, the same with the African Development Bank. We looked at the website yesterday where they try to evaluate the support we've been given to this country over these years. And they have a template so that you can easily read the one for Zimbabwe across to the one for Mauritania, to the one for that would be done for Kenya. And in the absence of an outline, I think that evaluators can feel free to check on different resources, particularly in the evaluation community, to see what is sort of expected. So here they show us, right? You have some kind of an introduction. You always start with some kind of an executive summary brief. I've seen executive summaries of 10 pages, and sometimes it's shocking how it's executive and it's 10 pages. So keeping it brief is essential, and getting the main, it's like a snapshot of the report, giving some introduction, particularly to the evaluation itself and the methodology and what has been done, talking a bit about the background of the program, and really going into what has been planned, putting together those evaluation questions. What was the evaluation going to ask, and what methodology was also used in collecting this information, so that data collection methods that were used. Then always a section around the findings, because those are the reason why we do evaluations, and the findings are, essentially what did you find, not so much what you're analyzing, because that always comes next. And it's very important to make a distinction between what we found there and what we are concluding because of what we have found. And the conclusion section really comes, and the idea is that it should look at, effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability, particularly those particular areas when you're looking at a project or a program. But at the same time, you have a list of recommendations, and those recommendations are based on the findings and the conclusion. So if you didn't find something and you haven't been able to analyze that in the conclusions, it's very difficult to build up a recommendation to it. And so you know, in that sense, these three sections are really speaking a lot to each other, and there has to be some coherence between them. What you see more and more is sort of the lessons learned, but it's termed differently, right? Lessons learned or way forward, because I think sometimes people are feeling like recommendations is sort of these are the improvements you should really be making, and then lessons learned, or I've also seen spaces where they talk about challenges, but in a much more positive way. So what was the formulation again? Challenges and challenges to be resolved or something. And people are very creative around what they're calling these things. But findings, conclusions, recommendations predominantly remain the same. Lessons learned, I think, can be reformulated into different things, because essentially you are trying to talk about what should you be learning out of this, and it draws a lot sometimes from best practices and from challenges. So yeah, best practices and challenges, I've seen it also phrased out in that way. Limitations speak, I think, a lot to more or less. Sometimes I'm thinking that we've got to be careful what we put as a lesson we've learned and as a limitation. And sometimes things are actually a lesson. We want to bring them out more as a limitation, or also the other way around. So also being very, very concise and clear and coherent in these two sections is always very important. And then obviously you've got to show where this information comes from. You're usually also putting in the appendices, you know, all your graphs, but you're also putting the list of people who are interviewed. And these days we're being very careful. No mobile phones numbers, as I have seen in other spaces. We put the name and the position of the person. That's usually sufficient information because of personal data protection rules, that you can't keep public information out there, even for people you've interviewed, and even if they have sometimes even given their consent to it. So this was just an idea to share. I don't think we need to go into looking at a report itself and seeing it, unless somebody had their report or something that they wanted us to open up, which is available online. Publication of reports is really, really, really essential, because people have to read the recommendations, and whether the recommendations are made for partners who are with us in one office or in another district. Others are relying to kind of see what lessons have been learned from particular space, what recommendations are made. They can be used for learning in that particular environment or also in other spaces. So on that note, we are done with today's session. I kindly share the template. Okay, I will do that. So, okay, Muiza, thank you for your response. Thank you so much. And it's great to hear some of the responsibilities that you have. And hopefully that next time you're able to share with others in terms of your role. And it seems it's quite extensive. You're going from data collection to all the way to reporting as well. All right. Thank you so much. We are done with the session for today. I would like to encourage you to look again at what has been shared as the upskilling program for the rest of the period. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of more generic information around development frameworks, but also just other topical issues on monitoring and evaluation, which are coming up. So please show up, listen in, participate and engage, because upskilling is not only when we are taking down notes or listening in to others presenting, but is also about sharing our own experiences in platforms such as this one. I appreciate your time over the last 3 days, and yeah, and hope to be able to engage with you in other spaces. For those who are not members of ZaMEA, really, again, we encourage you to join. It's really useful. The discussions go into levels of depth. You can ask questions, you can engage with real people in real time. And so it's been a pleasure to be here. And I don't know, Chair, if there's anything else to say apart from closing. I will hand over to you, Mr. Victor. Or anyone in Secretariat.
Hi, Paddy. Hi, Tim. Thank you very much for your time again, for sharing your wonderful experience. I believe there will be another opportunity that we will call upon you to come and share more experiences. To the team, we're grateful. We hope you learned one or two things. Like Paddy was saying, this is a continuous process. Our goal, if you look at our theme, is to ensure that we have a competent membership, and the upskilling is one direct program we have to achieve that. But we also have another pillar we look at being relevant. So we are hoping to see you being relevant to some of the initiatives that we are doing. We are promoting being more engaged in initiatives that contribute to national development. Then the other one is being ethical. We are hoping to, there's a team that is looking at some ethical standards that we'll use to regulate ourselves. So all these initiatives, you can participate. But I also wanted to remind you that next week on Friday at the University of Zambia, we have a discussion around strengthening M&D systems. We'll have the M&D director from Ministry of Finance. We have the planning director from Ministry of Local Government. We'll have the University of Zambia. We'll be sharing ideas and thoughts and experiences around how do we contribute to strengthening M&D systems in the public sector. So if you're able to come in person, that would be fantastic, because networking is more stronger when you are meeting in person, but we'll also have a virtual option. So just a reminder, we'll be sending out a poster and a reminder, and please feel free to invite others who you feel key to some of these discussions. So we'll end the meeting here. I believe Secretariat did share the upskilling schedule. We have more coming up. And like I mentioned last time, some of them will request you to share, to contribute something. Some of these will also be done, some of the sessions will be done in person. We want to engage more. So please be on the lookout. Follow the ZaMEA page on Facebook, and feel free to share ideas and feedback with the secretariats. So we can end the meeting here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paddy, and bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Chair.
Thank you.
Chair. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.